You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Gold, crude oil, corn, soybeans, and more. With so many tradable products, the futures options market can be an intimidating place. How can you possibly keep track of the latest trading developments across so many different products? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Welcome to This Week in Futures Options, the program designed to help active futures options traders stay on top of this ever-changing marketplace. Each week, we'll break down the top trades, hot products, volatility explosions, and much more. So be sure to check out our live stream via the Mixlr app, or join our live chat room at mixlr.com/options-insider. Whether you're an experienced veteran or a newcomer looking to separate the wheat from the lean hogs, This Week in Futures Options has the information you can't find anywhere else. This Week in Futures Options is brought to you by QuickStrike, options pricing and analysis software. Learn more about QuickStrike at bantix.com. This Week in Futures Options is also brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. Visit cmegroup.com/options. This Week in Futures Options is also brought to you by FTSE Russell, a leading global provider of benchmarks, analytics, and data solutions. For more information, please visit ftserussell.com. And now, get ready to break down the latest futures options trading activity. It's time for This Week in Futures Options.
All right, everybody, that rockin' tune means it is time to rock out once again with TWIFO, This Week in Futures Options, a program where pretty much the name says it all. We break down the week that was and indeed still is. And this week, we're going back a little bit farther than that because it is our final show here of 2019, final show of the decade. So we thought we'd look back here on the year that has been here in the world of futures options, see what products are lighting it up, see what's going on, any interesting nuggets of fun things to talk about. And speaking of fun things to talk about, of course, you guys can join us live every Thursday at 1:30 p.m. Central, 2:30 p.m. Eastern, right after Option Block. If you're tuning in for that one, just stay tuned. We'll be right back with a little bit of TWIFO as well. Or just hit the next button on your device of choice, whatever that may be. And helping me to break down the year that was here in all things futures options, our old friend used to be known as Dr. VIX. Now we just call him Mr. Rhoads. Yes, Russell Rhoads, the Director of Derivatives Research over there at TABB Group. Mr. Rhoads, welcome back to the TWIFO program for the final time in 2019 and indeed this decade, sir.
How was the decade to you?
Was
it good? Have you aged well?
I think I've aged well.
I know that I have not aged well.
I think the network has fared pretty.
I think the network has fared very well.
It's crazy to think the network expands beyond the decade. It's coming up on, 14
Oh, my
years.
goodness.
It's insanity.
We're going to be getting a learner's permit pretty soon.
I know. It's crazy to think we launched this bad boy all the way back in the now primordial ooze days of January 2007. So, yeah, coming up on a auspicious anniversary. But let's get to it. You know, Mr. Rose, I thought we'd change it up a little bit. Our old buddy, by the way, Mr. Sean, he's still traveling hither and yon, listeners. So, unfortunately, we won't be having him join us here today. This guy's, I don't envy his travel schedule. He's been I think since the last time we saw him in the studio, I know he was in Florida for the CME conference. Then he was in Singapore, I believe, for FIA Asia. Then I think in Europe after. I don't know which time zone he's in right now.
He may not even know what time zone
That's true.
he's in right
That's
now.
true. He may not even know what time zone he's in right now. So I thought we'd mix it up a little bit, Mr. Rocklobster. Mr. Rocklobster. I apologize.
Oh
That's the last show. That's the last show.
My gosh. No, it's better than calling me the meatball.
That is better than calling you the greasy
there
meatball.
There are many worse things that I could be called, starting with
yes,
the greasy meatball.
That means greasy meatball is definitely worse. I will concede that to you there. But I thought we'd mix it up. We usually say let's look at the movers and shakers for the week. How about this, Mr. Let's call you Dr. VIX again because that's fun.
Okay, I like that.
How about Mr. Dr. VIX? Let's look at the movers and shakers for the year. Are you down with that, sir?
I can do that.
All right, let's do it.
Can I guess what the biggest moving market in the futures area was?
I'm sure you've probably already seen the answer, though. So have you
have.
sullied yourself? If you haven't sullied yourself, then by all means, sir, I will allow you
It would be the first chance ever for me to be correct on your network.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's a rare occurrence, shall we say? But it works nonetheless. Okay, so what's lighting up your tape? What do you think is the number one mover? You can go upside or downside. I'll let you pick for the year.
I know that, and really, I just know that this is in these days in home fashion. I completely coated the walls of my home office in palladium, and may be solely responsible for the 58% price rise in palladium in 2019.
Yes, palladium is topping our list. You know, who knew palladium? The hot thing here these years, but apparently that is indeed the case. Palladium, number one, kind of giving away our upside mover for the year, but hey, we kind of talked about it.
Oh, you want to go backwards?
We talked about it. It's all right. It's like you've never done this before. You're new. So yes, Palladium is the number one mover out here for the year. Listen, we're talking about last week. Seems like last year. Last week that it was up about 60% for the year, and it was a historic year for Palladium. It had just blown through the 1900 level. It's given up a little bit of that, but still up 58% and change for the year. So that puts it firmly in the number one position to the upside. Do you want to guess any others, Mr. Rhodes?
No, I actually want to talk about palladium.
Let's talk about palladium.
In all seriousness here, you know what the biggest use is for palladium? In an industrial way, it's to be used in catalytic converters.
Catalytic converters for the industrial
cars.
side.
Right.
And coating for the other side.
But do electric cars use catalytic converters?
No, they do not.
I know. So you would almost think that palladium was being used in the batteries somehow that go into such vehicles.
No, we were talking last show about there apparently were some power outages in South Africa, so that has contributed. That's the conspiracy theory, at least. That has contributed. So it's a supply issue where they can't really produce as much as they could for some. I don't know what's behind the power outages, but there have been power outages there, and as a result, that is apparently making supply a bit of an issue, which is apparently from the powers that be, that is apparently contributing to this. Is that what you're hearing as well, sir?
Well, I think that's the public story behind some sort of James
tinfoil hat here. What you
Well, I think it's some sort of James Bond thing going on, where Spectre has bought up all the palladium in the world, and next thing you know, all these electric cars are going to start bursting into flames on the Eisenhower. We're all going to go back to gas-powered
They're all
cars.
going to have to have catalytic converters again for some strange reason. We don't know why. There's no process that requires it, but yet they will need catalytic converters. And then palladium, forget 1900, 19,000.
Yeah.
That's where we're going. I pulled it up right now while you're talking, Mr. Dr. VIX. Guess how many options contract palladium did this week?
This week?
Whole week? This week alone.
34.
That's actually not a bad guess.
And that is a guess.
It was 78 last week. And this week
Are you sure they're not double counting?
It is a whopping 265 this week. So someone did 160 of the Feb 21.5 calls.
Now, to our friend Palladium's defense, this is a kind of a quiet time of year.
Yes, it's only seasonality. Otherwise, Palladium would be doing 7,000 contracts a day, let alone. Let's see here. Yes, these are the Feb. If you're curious, what is dominating this expansive tape, listeners? It's the 21.5 calls. Actually, they did 60 of them. Looks like they did a 1x2, Mr. Dr. VIX. In 1990, 21.5, 1x2, 30 by 60. Can you deal with that size, sir? 30 by 60 times.
Who's to say I wasn't on the other side of it?
I'm going to guess they bought the 1990s and sold 21. I don't know. Or the other way around. Maybe they're feeling more upside, so they're selling one, buying two for the just more explosive upside. 'Cause like I said, right now we are at 1903.
I'm hedging the cost of coating the rest of my house in palladium.
You're coding, others are building catalytic converter, others are having supply issues. A lot of drivers for Palladium out there. I heard your wife likes some Palladium jewelry. So to each their own. Some folks like platinum. She prefers Palladium. So there you go. To each their own. Who's to say what a precious metal is these days, right? We don't judge here on the show. What do you think is number 2 outside of Palladium, sir? Since we're going from the top.
Well, I know tech stocks have done particularly well. I'm going to say the NASDAQ 100.
It's amazing. How could you possibly come up with these answers on your own, sir? This is just madness here. But yes, you are correct. Number 2 is the NASDAQ 100 E-mini, up a whopping, listeners, a whopping 35.8% here this year. This one, unlike the others, Mr. Dr. VIX, does a little bit of paper. So let's see if I can pull that up for you. Now, by the way, listeners, I neglected to mention at the top of the show, you can follow along with all of this, cmegroup.com/TWIFO. That's the place to go to get all the reports, all the good stuff that you need to follow along with the show, to generate them for yourself, and just pretty much have a good time. cmegroup.com/TWIFO, the place to have a good time. I do believe that is their tagline. Oh, let's try it again. Mr. Sean says he might be able to join us. So let's see if I could beam him in remotely, listeners. The magic of technology here.
He wants to get in on this Palladium talk.
He does. Who doesn't want to get in on this Palladium talk here? I'm going to try him again, though, really quick. But NASDAQ, let's pull up the NASDAQ, because we're talking NASDAQ. You know why? His ears are burning, because we're talking NASDAQ E-mini, and he wants to get in here and talk some Russell. So his ears are probably burning. Who knows what's going on with his connection, wherever he is in the world. But let's look at the NASDAQ while we're waiting here, listeners. All right, NASDAQ. Guess how many contracts the NASDAQ 100 did this week, Mr. Dr. VIX? This week?
So far this week, 12,000.
Not bad. About 2x, about 26,000 on that front. So a little more active than Palladium, just a wee bit.
I actually do monitor option on futures volume, so I might have some decent guesses in here.
Might have some insight.
The next one is a wild card, though.
yes, we'll see. So NASDAQ lighting it up here this week, listeners. Number 1 with a bullet out here this week in NASDAQ. By the way, NASDAQ 100 threatening the 86 half levels, about 86.32 right now. So it's 85. What is number 1 with a bullet? The 85.80 calls in D. So these are going out today. These have a day left. 85.80 calls doing nearly 1,000 this week. That's the big print. I'm going to go out on a limb and say those are probably closing. Let's see. Actually, no, I take that back. They opened on Monday. These are opening. So people opening 85.80 calls with so in the money calls with a few days to go. So hey, this is what I like about the futures options side of the fence, Mr. Rhodes, as opposed to getting an equity options land, because you see the weeklies in equity options and you see the getting on to the last day. Very rarely are they opening for size. Usually if they are, it's some sort of, and what do they do in the weeklies all the time? They're just harvesting the quote-unquote risk premium, right? What are your thoughts on the NASDAQ, sir, while I try to wrangle Mr. Smith?
I think if we did a survey and we said, what has performed the best in 2019, and we did NASDAQ, S&P 500, or Russell 2000, I think nobody would vote for Russell 2000. Everybody knows it's been a bad year for the small cap domestic stocks. But I really was not aware that tech stocks had done as well as they have this year, and would not have guessed the NASDAQ 100 at all, especially because you've got such large companies, and it's a cap-weighted thing, but you have such large companies taking such a big portion of the NASDAQ 100 that it's kind of difficult for Apple to grow 25% in a single year. So
they somehow managed to do it.
I know they managed to do it, but
somehow,
going from $1 billion to $1 billion, 200 or trillion to 1.25 trillion. That's a that's kind of tough.
We had a guest on here not too long ago, and they said, just think about how much Apple has grown this year in terms of just stock share price, and it is kind of daunting when you think about that. Speaking of daunting, he's a daunting fellow in his own stead. I do believe now we are joined by Mr. Sean Smith, the managing director of derivatives licensing over there in FTSE Russell. Mr. Smith, are you there, sir?
I am here.
Aha, there he is.
Flesh.
The 8th time is the charm.
I am so sorry. You had the wrong number to get me.
I'm even scared to ask where you are because you've been, I think, traveling a wee bit since the last time you and I sat down together here. By the way, Mr. Rhodes is holding down your guest chair, and he brought delicious filet mignons with him today. So you've been outclassed in the studio, sir.
Oh my gosh, I sure have. Russell, great to hear your voice. Great to have you on the show. And Mark, always thank you for having me on the show as well. I've been traveling crazy. I literally have gone around the world. So
give us a quick overview of where the heck you've been since the last time you sat down here on the show, sir.
I flew from here to I'm in Chicago, by the way. I'm in here in Chicago, and it's good to be here. And I'm done traveling for the year, so I'm home. But I was in Singapore for the Futures Industry Association conference, the FIA Asia conference, and then from there, my travels took me to London. So I continued on my journey and spent a week in Asia, and then a week in London, and then flew home. So I'm physically in this time zone. I'm like bodily somewhere in between, and my mental clock is like all over the place. So, but it's good to be home. It's good to be here for the rest of the holidays, and I'm here for the rest of the year.
So you're stuck somewhere between Europe and Asia, aren't we all, sir? At the end of the day, mentally, we're all stuck somewhere between Europe and Asia. But I think I know why you wanted to beam in. Your ears must have been burning because we were just talking equities, sir. So you have perfect timing. We were just finishing some of our top fives for the year. We dialed it back, not just for the week, but top 5 movers and shakers for the year. We're just talking NASDAQ 100, which was at a number 2 there, with up 35.6%. So, Mr. Smith, as you've been traveling the world preaching the gospel of small cap, what has been lighting up your tape? What's going on in the world of small cap since the last time you and I chatted, sir?
Well, I think the highlight has been just one. I think the last time I was there, we were talking about the level of the indices and how some of the indices had been outperforming small caps, and the Russell Index was threatening the 1600 level for, I think, a couple of the last few shows, and since then we've clearly, with the rest of the market, blown through that number. But that was something you and I were talking about. We're also talking about global distribution of small caps and the fact that there's a lot of interest in coming from Asia. There's still a lot of interest in small caps is becoming a big topic of conversation amongst professional traders, institutional clients, banks, and retail in several regions. So very exciting to hear. Lots of questions, lots of dialogue in regards to the global distribution of futures and options over there in the small cap space for the Russell products. So Russell 2000 is getting some attention over there as the index that it should.
I love to hear that small cap U.S. domestic stocks have an interest and a mind share in Asia and Europe and everywhere else. Endlessly fascinating to me. Since we're in it, let's break down what's going on the vol side of the spectrum. Coming into showtime, we saw our old friend, your old friend, Mr. Rhodes, the VIX cash down to about 12.5. That puts it down about 2 handles from where it was on our last show last week. Listeners, our old friend VVIX also coming off. VVIX, of course, the volatility of volatility was north of the triple-digit level, was north of 100, now back down below it, down about, almost 5 handles from our last show, down to about 98 3/4 or so. And our old friend, the RVX, a.k.a. the VIX of the Russell 2000, way off, down to about 14 1/4. I guess all that lift coming in. So that's down about 2 3/4 points from last week. And that puts that VIX RVX spread pretty tight at about not even 2 handles, 1 3/4 handles, which is pretty narrow. Which actually, Mr. Rhodes, before I toss it, I'm actually going to cheat. I'm going to bump up a question from a listener we have here because it's very timely. It comes from Angel, and they want to know, is there a level at which the RVX VIX trade becomes particularly attractive? This is, something we've bandied about on the show in the past. You and I have discussed this many times in the past. We had Rick Rosenthal from the CME from the CBO, on not too long ago, talking about with that trade usually averages out around somewhere between 3 and 3.5, that spread. So the fact that we're pretty tight is worthy of note. So I'm curious to you, first off, what do you think about that spread level? Then B, what do you have to say for our listener? What was it, Angel, the name, who thinks so? What levels, where does it start getting your interest, sir?
Well, thinking about that spread, I would say 2020 may be the year of small caps. And I'm not just saying that because Sean's on the line.
You literally just said that because Sean's on the line.
I did not just say that because Sean's on the line. But, I always like to see that, you're looking at it point-wise. I always like to see it within about 10%. And that's where I would actually start watching it. And I did trade it every once in a while. I was allowed to trade these things when I was at SIBO. And when we say trade it, basically if RVX gets close enough to VIX or gets to a discount to VIX, and it's also showing up in the futures contracts, buying the RVX future and selling the VIX futures contract. So
you were the guy doing the one lots of open interest in RVX. That was you.
That was me. So I was such a team player at SIBO. I did the first ever GVZ futures trade.
A product which
and probably the last one too.
A product which I've had professionals in this space come on this network over the years and argue to me that there never was such a thing as a GVZ future.
I know,
it never existed. Because
I lost money in it. But yeah, just when RVX starts to reach around 10%, under a 10% premium to VIX, that's where I would look to trade those futures against each other. Unfortunately, you can't do that right now. So, looking at some way that you try to lock in the volatility, being long volatility in RVX and short volatility in VIX is the best thing you can do. Maybe looking at straddles. I'm not 100% sure the best way to lock that in is a single spread.
Yeah, it's a challenging beast now because you're right. One of the products is off the board. What do you say, Mr. Smith? Mr. Rhodes here, single-handedly keeping RVX alive for you guys back in the day, Sean.
Yeah, we talk about that spread every single week, and it's become quite a topic of conversation with your clients and out on the road. I'm very hopeful of SIBO bringing that futures contract back. So let's keep our fingers crossed. And it's still tradable in the options. You got to just trade RHOAD options versus the VIX, but it's still possible. But again, having the ability to actually trade the RVX future would just really enhance our discussion on these. And I think, and Russell, you said 2020 is the year of small caps. Every year is my year of the small caps, but I agree. I think 2020 is going to be a really major focus for this suite of products. What I called them a gang of stocks once on this show, I think, which we got some laughter out of you and I, Mark.
Yes, that was a good one. Yes, a volatile gang of stocks, something like that. Yes,
a volatile gang of stocks. Yeah, it was actually a funny comment. I think we had a couple of listeners comment on that a week or two after that as well. But again, I'm excited. We just have to stay on top of Rick Rosenthal, and that's richard.rosenthal@sibo.com. Please, guys, just keep the RVX requests for that product to come back right at him, because the CME listens to client demand, or CBOE listens to client demand.
Let's look here and see what the client demand is this week. It's funny, that narrative of small caps breaking out. You're right, it has kind of gotten out there a bit. How many times were we hand-wringing on this program that it seemed like the Russell 2000 couldn't get past that 1600 level? It would get up to it, it would bounce off. It would get up to it, it would bounce off. I'm not the biggest believer in technical levels, but that one certainly seemed to have some muscle behind it. And yet we broke through it recently. Like I said, even up this week, up another 25 handles, or about 1.6% out there in the old Russell 2000. Puts us at nearly a 1670, 1666.80 right now coming into showtime. And, we always talk, Sean, about how pretty much all the paper on these Russell 2000 options on CME, pretty much all of it is aggregated in far out of the money and pretty far out puts. And maybe we're seeing a bit of a turn of that as well, because maybe this is something to back up this narrative of a breakout, because I'm looking at the paper flow this week and the big prints were in the 16 double calls. So formerly upside calls, now in the money calls, going up quite a few times, a couple thousand times on these ones alone just on Monday. And actually looks like they were closing some out and taking some off. So it looks like they had opened those up previously. So upside specking for size, and I guess taking them off on an opportune week here this week. So perhaps a sign, Sean, that the worm is turning. We're not just talking about far out of the money March, 20% out of the money puts anymore. We're actually talking about near-term upside calls for decent size. Is that your take as well, Sean?
Yeah, and it's an example of the performance of the index in current levels. So that 1600 level was one of those barriers you and I talked about for weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised to see another big out of the money transaction in the near future in those upside calls, just as the market continues to be bullish. And I think the commentary you hear on TV and various economic areas is that we're not going to see any increase in rates in the near term future at all. So I think that's a sentiment for stocks moving in the positive direction, which means vols coming in, which means there's ample opportunity to harvest. But then again, on the put side, this is an opportunity for those hedgers and those that like to buy protection to get it at a reasonable level. And I'm a big fan of buy puts when you can, not when you have to.
That is your mantra out there. Buy puts when you can, not when you have to. Look, it looks like Monday was a big day across the board for these Russell options. Maybe a 16-20, 16 double, 1 by 3, kind of if you read into the tea leaves a little bit, but it could have just been an active day across the board as well. Either way, a lot of paper going up here on the call side of the ledger. Mr. Rhodes, I know you mostly watch yourself large cap volatility, a little bit of VIX. Do you watch a little small cap? And also, I didn't get a chance to really ask you. We got so deep into the small cap quickly. Anything catching your eye in your old stomping grounds of large cap volatility, aka VIXer?
No, not really. I mean, it's the mid 12 range. Now that we're got all the news behind us and holidays in front of us, I think it's just a normal. It's kind of a normal December, which I know last year we did not have a normal
Last
December.
year was anything but normal.
But, we got the December contract out of the way yesterday. I didn't see what the final settlement was. I assume it was in the low 12s. Now we start to look forward to 2020. But things are, I think, for the next couple of weeks, even with nothing's going on in Washington, D.C., we're not talking to anybody about any trade things.
Well, we did just impeach a president, but other than that, nothing's happening.
Nothing's going on.
Nothing's happening.
Nothing to see here. You know what? I think Clinton. I think we had VIX when Clinton was impeached. I got to go back and look at that.
Yeah.
But it's normal seasonal VIX right now, which with the extra holidays puts a little bit of extra pressure on it. And again, last year was an anomaly. It'll be interesting just to see how things start out going into January. If we start off with the typical January rally or not. I have a funny feeling that we're going to sit perfectly. I would be perfectly happy to sell month-end January straddles on the last day of December, because I have this funny feeling that January is going to be a nothing burger until things really start to kick off with primary season and those sorts of things.
It is strange because you mentioned we are having a seasonally normal, quote-unquote, December for VIX and volatility. And by the way, I mentioned it was December for Clinton. 98 was when the impeachment was. We definitely had a VIX disseminated back then. It's the old school VIX, but still. Hey, the OEX can play too on occasion. So 98, December 98. So actually, was it December? Yeah, it was December 19th. It was exactly to the, wow.
Yeah, it is 21. It's 21 years ago today.
Wow.
Yeah.
A little auspicious there.
It is.
I hadn't realized we lined up so closely there. But are you surprised, speaking of that, Russell, that we are having such a seasonally normal, kind of quiet, kind of tranquil December, given the fact that we still have this trade war? It's starting, it seems like it's winding down, but we came into this month hot and heavy with the trade war, back and forth from Beijing to Washington and vice versa. We also had the looming impeachment of a president, not exactly a normal thing. So we had Brexit votes still, we had a lot of things, a lot of shoes waiting to drop out there. And yet you're right, we're heading, it seems like, for a seasonally, all things considered, fairly normal Christmas season. Does that surprise you?
No, I'm not really surprised. We don't care about the impeachment. Our market does, other than maybe being a little bit frustrated that our favorite business network is preempting that with preempting our normal programming with the floor of the House and people speaking to an empty room, but making sure that they get their speech in the record. Our industry does not really care about the whole impeachment process. Our industry cares about what kind of 2019 they had. Most people have had a very good 2019 and are probably pretty happy to sit on the sidelines the next couple of weeks and then start over in 2020. Last year, people were panicking because they were losing their whole year in the last couple of months of the year. So I think, and you keep hearing people talk about how bad the economy is, or how the markets are not properly reflecting the economy. And we got 3.5% of unemployment. I mean, I understand that stocks are overvalued relative to the economic growth we've expected or that we've had, but the stock market might be expecting more of the same and expecting the economy to catch up with the economy to catch up with what the stocks are already discounting.
Before we get off volatility really quickly, I had our old buddy, Mr. Eric Norland, one of the senior economists over there at CME on the show last week. We had a great, far-reaching conversation on a number of topics. One of the things, little nugget he threw out there at the end, which I thought was kind of fascinating, we didn't really have time to parse, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. He said, the 2010s overall, and you don't really think of volatility from a decades-long perspective, but he said the 2010s overall, at least according to his analysis, outside of a few aberrations like obviously 08 and a few other time periods in there, were actually fairly low from a volatility perspective. And he went out on a limb and said he predicts the decade of the 2020s will be, I believe, to quote him, several muches more volatile than the 2010s were. What do you think about that, Mr. Dr. VIX? Yay or nay?
It's going to be very difficult to disagree with that. There's going to be a lot of turnover with respect to leadership in Washington, D.C., maybe even a whole generational change with respect to change of leadership in Washington, D.C. And the new generation is not as business-friendly as the old generation, to say the least. So it's very possible that I don't really think much beyond next week very often, but I would have a very difficult time disagreeing with that. We also went through the whole decade without any real shift to a high volatility regime. We never really had a sustained one anytime in this last 10-year period. We had short ones, but we never had
bursts of volatility.
We never had a shift where people would consider VIX under 20 as low, ever. So if VIX really is some sort of mean reverting measure, it's time for some higher volatility for some time.
That would be fascinating to see. People also forget even this year, we came into this year at VIX of about a 25. People forget that now that we're in the seasonal adjusted portion of the year where we're threatening the low teens, maybe even single digits again sometime soon, that we had it even earlier this year. But it was, like I said, you mentioned, very short-lived and interesting to see two of you now weighing in on the perhaps a decade of more volatility in front of us listeners, which is intriguing here. But we got to keep on rolling here with some other products here on the show. Amazing how time flies when we're talking all things equities and everything else. Really quickly, some of the other top fives here for the year. Sean, we're breaking down now. Top 5 movers and shakers for the year. Number 3, our old friend, Class 3 milk, dairy. The sector that keeps on giving, not from an options perspective, but from an overall movement perspective. Dairy is the thing, up 35.5%. Number 4 for the top 5. We haven't even gotten to the bottom 5 yet. Number 4 for the top 5, Eurodollars, your old friend, Mr. Rhodes, 34.5%. By the way, I did a whole long discussion on the 10-year and yield curves last week with Mr. Norland. I think I even said on the show, I hope Mr. Rhodes is listening, because you're always complaining I don't give you enough rates. You got a ton of it last week, sir.
Cool. I love it. Thank you very much.
Cool, Indy. I did it
very
just
cool.
for you.
What's interesting is Eurodollar options on Eurodollar futures. It's like the only market that had significantly higher volume in November, and volatility got completely crushed in the Eurodollar options. Volume was up on a year-over-year basis like 500,000 contracts a day. Just ridiculous what seems to be going on in that market.
Yeah, the volume out there, I've had people from outside the space reach out to me with some questions about it. It's just like, it's almost hard to convey to a lay person, let alone to an experienced person, how much volume goes up out there. It is kind of hard to grasp.
It's the number 2 market in the world, right? You know what the number 1 is by volume?
By volume, I'm going to guess it's probably the Shanghai Rebar or Kospi, one of those.
Nope.
No?
Bovespa in Brazil.
Really?
Yeah, Mini Bovespa has traded 1.2 billion contracts in the first 9 months
of the Kospi and the Shanghai Rebar. I know those are pretty small.
I stumped the host.
Is that a tiny contract?
It is a tiny contract.
That must be it. There you go. There you go. So you're playing some contract.
It's a smaller contract. It's like a $6,000 or $7,000 contract.
Okay. Yes, Brazil coming on the radar for. I've talked to those folks a few times about trying to get some more insight into what's lighting up over there in Brazil land. Maybe stay tuned for that. Maybe in 2020, listeners, we'll see some more fun stuff coming out of Brazil over there. And round out the top 5, our old friend WTI, listeners. It was a year that kept on giving and taking and giving and taking, and WTI up 31.5% for the year, so it ended up giving pretty hard. In fact, this past week, giving a little bit more. It seems like the looming détente out there in the trade war is cheering folks up, because WTI coming to showtime, not only is it north of the 60 handles, north of 61.10 coming into the second half of the show here. So up nearly 2% on the week, and obviously 31.5% for the year. So a good year for crude bulls. Didn't seem like that for a while there, at least on WTI perspective. But overall, a crazy time here. Mr. Rhodes, we were talking last time, before I get to some of the numbers here, we were talking last time about the impact for the Saudi IPO and how maybe that might change things going forward for all things crude. Are you on board that train now that it seems like it was such a distant thing in the future, but now it's already happened, the Saudi IPO? Do you think that's going to change things going forward in this marketplace, sir?
I do think that I don't necessarily think it's the Saudi IPO that's going to change things, but the OPEC has been playing together nicely as far as the price of oil goes. And it really has been the Saudis doing the heavy lifting behind keeping the price up. I think they're tired of being the guys that make everybody else follow the rules and turn the spigot off to keep the price higher. I think they're going to look to other people to maybe carry that burden going forward. And what's the incentive for other people to carry that burden going forward? Are they IPOing their national oil company? I think not. So I would have a very difficult time seeing oil hold up here unless the Saudis continue to, desire that it stays up there. And really, they got the IPO done. I don't know if they're as concerned about the price of oil as much as they were even a few weeks ago.
Are you implying there may have been some behind-the-scenes skullduggery to keep us north of that 60 handle?
Just if you sell something and you supply a big portion of it, and it's a product that really does stick with supply demand, you can always cut back a little bit of the supply and make the price go up if you're willing to make a little bit less money. And that's what they did. That's not skullduggery or whatever you said. That's
easy for you to say. It's Econ 101. Yes, it is. You're right.
Something else.
It does seem like so long ago we were talking about WTI in the mid 40 handle. That was only January, listeners. Came into the year about 46.5 or so, right around that 46 level. And we were talking, will it break 50 to the upside anytime soon? And here we are closing out the year north of the 60 handle. Oh, what an IPO, and perhaps a ending of the global trade war and everything else. All that can conspire to push things north a little bit, because that's been the story all year long. You guys have all wanted to talk about the upside skew. When will it materialize itself? What will happen to the upside in crude? Let's look at that really quickly here this week. Here, like I said, crude at WTI, I should say, up about 61.10, up about nearly 2% here on the week. The lion's share of the action, about almost 45%, coming in the Feb contract here this week. And we're at 61, Mr. Rhodes. What would you guess is the number one? No cheating. I see you trying to look.
No.
What would you guess is the number one print? I'm going to limb and say it's not what you would expect.
I was peeking to see what the price of oil was. And then you said 61, and I leaned back. I would guess the 60s.
Okay, and I'm saying, but what do you think is the number one print this week? Number one options trade this week? Just take a guess. A flyer.
A flyer? Somebody buying the 65 calls somewhere?
That would be a reasonable guess.
That's a flyer.
But no, actually. Trade. It's the opposite. It's the opposite way. It's the 50 puts in February, going up nearly 10,000 times, 9,000 times and change. Number one with a bullet here this week. And they traded pretty much all week, 2,300 on Monday, 1,600 on 3,500 yesterday. Most of that opening, a good chunk of that opening. So size opening on the 50 put strike, Mr. Rhodes. What is that?
Can I put my tinfoil hat on again real quick?
Please do.
That's the Saudis hedging themselves.
I was just going to say, you're going to say it's the Saudis.
It's the Saudis.
It's the Saudis. They might want to do more than 10,000 if that's the case, if that's the Saudis.
I feel memes coming on in the near future. We're talking about oil.
Downside puts. Lighten up the tape here this week, listeners. And then
somebody's hedging. That's a logical hedge if you are worried about the macroeconomic situation going into next year. It could drop quick.
Yeah, it's a near-term hedge. Yeah. It's only out to February, so they're not going out to June or Dece or anything like that.
Yeah.
So.
I think we're going to start 2020 and start getting bad news right off the bat. I forgot what year it was. 2016? When was the Volmageddon? 2017 or 2016?
A Bixocalypse? That was 2018.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't was it last year?
Yes, February 2018.
Damn, how long have I worked at TABB?
You're just all over you're caught between Europe and Asia like Sean here.
No, yeah, I kind of am. I just got back from Europe. So
yes, VIX-Ocalypse. That seems like it was 10 years ago, doesn't it?
Like
you know, it seems like a long time ago when you and I were doing the live vol views on election night. That seems like a century ago. Obviously, we know what day that was.
Yeah.
But still, how the worm has turned from a vol perspective and how the crude worm has turned out here as well. 50 puts lighten up the tape. And number 2, a tie for number 2 with the 55 puts. So the double puts doing about 6,200 and the 65 call. Those are your ones you mentioned before. Those doing about...
out in February?
Those out in February as well. Up to about 6,500 of those. So slightly taking the lead for number 2 there. The lion's share coming on Monday, actually, 2,500. Bit of closing action. Looks like a little bit of back and forth to slightly closing action on those Feb 65 calls. I'm going to go out on a limb and saying, since it was mostly puts, that the puts did all right, but actually the skew came in a little bit. Vol came in pretty hard this week as well, listeners. Getting north of that 60 handle and this IPO in the rearview mirror, and obviously the trade war potentially winding down all of that, crushing the vol out here in WTI, off nearly 4 points in that Feb contract. So it's a bit of a Volmageddon in and of itself right there. And all that vol coming in took in the puts as well. The puts were nearly 13% rich to the at the money this past week. This week, they're about 12%. So the puts coming in about 1%. Still bid, still leading the dance. That's all of you out there looking for a sign that the calls are shifting into high gear, that the calls are leading the dance. Not this week. The calls were 8% cheap to the at the money this past week. This week, they're 8.5% cheap, so even cheaper. So vol coming in, calls getting cheaper, and puts coming in a little bit. You might expect that with all that vol coming in quite a bit. Does that surprise you, Mr. Rhodes? You're not seeing any skew change?
It doesn't surprise me because I do think that the big concerns to the downside, not even before you told me that how much volume we were seeing in the puts, we are at the upper end of the range that we've been trading in for some time.
Speaking of downside, we haven't even touched on the downside movers for the year here already. And let's see. Let's start from the bottom this time because Mr. Rhodes threw me off starting from the top last time. The number 5, and it's funny, orders of magnitude, we're talking a much different beast to the downside than it is to the upside. Upside, we were talking 58%, 35%, nothing below 31%. And to the downside, it's a different beast. Number 5 to the downside is the Aussie dollar, US dollar, only off 1.5%. That seems... comparative
day.
That's compared. I know. That's compared. That's well, not a year.
You know what the volatility is of currencies.
Yeah, FX is a different beast.
Yeah, it's like 3 and 4.
So yeah, 1.5% is a Volmageddon for them out there as well. But still, yeah, 1.5% for the Aussie dollar, US dollar. That's number 5. Number 4, also in the FX world, the Euro US dollar off about 2%. And then we get out to, here's where we find some ags. No ags to be found in the upside, but some ags on the dark side. Soybean meal off 3.6%. And then KC wheat off 5.6% for number 2. And number 1, can you guess what number 1 was, Mr. Rhodes? You just saw it, so you cheated. So I'm going to do it myself.
I never would have guessed that. I also never would have guessed that any agricultural product would have been in the bottom 5. Just because of the impact that the trade war had. You know, I felt like they would have been holding up still. So I'll admit when I'm surprised. I'm very surprised.
The lingering damage out there, it's hard to even with the detente at the end.
With global warming, nobody is using natural gas anymore. That's the end of the story, right there. We're not heating anything. We don't need to.
We saw predicting the most dire of all, obviously, winters ever. Of course, we haven't really seen that yet. Except for today. A little cold out here in Chicago today. But other than that, the dire prediction not coming to pass is part of what's also some supply gluts out there. That combo kind of hitting for a 1-2. We see nat gas all over the place over the course of Q4. It's up 1 week 15%, down 8%. It's been all over the place. Ending the year, obviously, net down about 20.2%. Sean, I will let you be our arbiter of where we go next here. Do you want to hit on one of these to the downside? Do you want to do nat gas or soybeans or maybe FX? Or is there something else you think we should hit on here before we get some of the listeners onto the program to end the show, sir?
Let's go with let's stay on the energy front. No, you know what? Let's go soybeans because I think that nat gas is going to follow in the direction of crude in terms of, well, then again, please give me some guidance here where you think we should go.
We can do soybeans. Let's do it.
I'm still between Europe and Asia. I apologize.
Let's do soybean. Soybean meal was the big mover to the downside. Not as big of an options beast, but we could talk that a little bit here. Soybean meal coming into showtime is actually up, so getting back some of that on the week here is up about 0.5% on the week. We're hovering right around that 300 handle, listeners, about 298.5 or so out here in soybean meal land. The big contract with about 43% of the paper this week are the Jans. Actually, the Jans have about 8 days to go. The big print was the 305 call, so some upside, doing about 3,000 contracts. Again, this is not a huge option product, but decent paper, about 34,000 contracts this week, so decent size. Again, near-term upside calls leading the dance out here. 305 calls in soybean meal this week. Pretty much steady throughout the week. 800 at a clip every day. That's kind of the trade du jour out here, apparently, in soybeans. So betting on maybe the breakthrough 300 and off to 305. You know, I hate parsing skew in a contract that's less than 2 weeks to go. So maybe let's move out to the number 2 here. Let's go out to March, and let's talk. That had about 26% of the paper. And let's see what the skew is doing out there, because 1 week to go skew is a fool's errand here. Let's go. And the vol is up slightly in this March contract, up about 0.5 point. And we're seeing the puts were about 7% cheap to the at-the-money last week. This week, they're almost 10%. So the puts have gotten cheaper. And the calls, not surprisingly, leading the dance. They were 9.3% rich at the money last week. This week, they are 10.3% rich. So calls getting a bit, not surprising. We saw that call action in Jan, but also looks like some in March as well. And people betting on perhaps a return over 300 here in soybean meal. Before we roll on to listener questions, I do want to hit on really quickly as well. Of course, we do a whole show on crypto now, so I encourage you to check that out. But we had another anniversary, not just the end of the decade and everything else, but also the Bitcoin fut. Do you remember this dance, Russell? It doesn't seem like it was 2 years ago. You were still at the SIBO then, and both exchanges, CME and CBOE, were racing each other out of the gate to see who could list the first Bitcoin future. Of course,
we won.
Yes,
SIBO won.
A Pyrrhic victory, if ever there was one, sir. Because unfortunately, that contract no longer with us today, listeners. Delisted back in June or so. But the CME Bitcoin futures still around, and guess what? They're actually trading. They turned 2 on this Wednesday. Some highlights here of what we've seen over the past 2 years. About almost 2.5 million contracts traded total since launch. That works it out. Remember, it's got a 5x multiple, listeners, so right around 12.5 million equivalent Bitcoin. If you're into notional value, that's about 92 billion in notional. The ADV is ticking up to about 5,000 contracts a day, about 49.29. So that's pretty decent, particularly back in the early days when people were wondering, would the 1 coin contract or the 5 coin contract, which one would win out? It seemed like the CME contract was pretty meaty, given the fact that at the time, Bitcoin was threatening 20,000 to the upside. So a 5x contract was pretty meaty, but it turned out that's what the market wanted. Yeah, the market wanted that, and especially now that Bitcoin has, shall we say, come off a little bit. That looks much better. Let's see. Also, open interest. The record was set back this July with about 6,000 contracts open. Record volume day was back in May, actually, May 13th, with 33,677. And large daily open interest holders are up to 45 now, with 3,600 accounts trading. And by the way, of course, you say all this to lead into, in a couple of weeks, the question you've been asking us for literally 2 years, when we're going to get the options, we're going to finally see the answer to that. January 13th. So in a couple of weeks, listeners, we'll be here. Maybe we'll have Mr. Rhodes back on to talk crypto. You doing a lot of crypto over there, sir?
Yes, doing tons of crypto. I'm paying attention to not just the CME products that are out there and trading, also paying attention to the sagas that are going on at other exchanges, products that are being launched by other exchanges. I spend a lot of time on the crypto space.
There's a lot of fun stuff going on out there. I look forward to sinking our teeth into more, and I also look forward to sinking my teeth into some of your questions. It is time for your futures options feedback.
It's time for your questions, comments, and insights. It's time for Futures Options Feedback. Submit your questions at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/The Options Insider, stocktwits.com/Options Insider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com. You can also submit your feedback via our Options Insider Radio Network mobile app, available for iOS, Android, and Kindle Fire devices. You can even ask your questions live every Friday at 3 p.m. Central via our Mixlr chat room. So grab the Mixlr app or just search for Options Insider at Mixlr.com. That's MIXLR.com.
All right, everybody, welcome to your Futures Options Feedback segment, the portion where you guys take the reins, your questions, your comments, a lot of good ones. Since we're doing like kind of an end-of-the-year wrap-up show, this question jumps off the page at me. It comes from Avast with an exclamation. Maybe it's a pirate. Avast, ye hearties out there. I like it. Avast wants to know, what were your surprises for the year in futures options? Well, there were many. There were many and legion. I may have to cheat and kick things off with one that I kind of just talked about. But for me, it seemed like I was beating my head against the wall for exactly 2 years now, saying, when the heck are we going to get the futures options on Bitcoin? And everyone, CME and SIBO both, no one wanted to really give me an answer. They both kind of punted and talked about doing other things like improving the ETH reference rate and everything else like that, and hinted at things like ETH futures. No one talked about options on the Bitcoin futures. So I'm kind of surprised that we're actually getting them in January now. So that, to me, maybe a bit of a cheat because we just talked about it. But for me, that's one of the bigger surprises I had this year. And it just happened a couple of weeks ago when they announced they were actually launching their Bitcoin options. So interesting stuff. I'll mull over some more, but that one leaps out to me top of mind. Sean, I know you're stuck mentally between Europe and Asia, but for you, maybe on the small cap side or maybe somewhere else, were there any surprises that really jumped off the page for you this year when it comes to all things futures options looking back, sir?
In terms of, it's not a surprise, but I'm just pleasantly pleased with the business continuing to grow with our futures options partners, and especially CME Group right now with volumes and open interest growing, the number of clients that trade the product, the global distribution of the product. I can't say it's a surprise, but I am just extremely pleased with the performance of our exchanges and our products at the exchanges. So I hope that answers your question. So, yeah, but no big surprises because we do have tremendous partners and they do such a great job with the product suite at each of the exchanges. So, I guess the word is extremely pleased, not surprised.
I might cheat and give a second one here and say I was somewhat surprised throughout the year at the continued weakness of the WTI call skew. That never really seemed to get much life behind it, and it still doesn't as we speak. So maybe the lingering malaise of upside interest in WTI, that probably was a bit of a surprise for me as well. Here's a couple there for you, Mr. Rhodes. What surprised you this year from a futures options perspective, sir?
Well, if you look at what was going on volume-wise in the products that trade at CME Group, it's not surprising since the Fed changed stance a couple of times over the course of 2019 that we saw a huge increase in option volume for Eurodollars and Eurodollar options, and saw really nice numbers with respect to 10-year notes. The 5-year note average daily volume options on the 5-year note options on futures, that volume's up on an average day 42% year over year. Average day, those things trade 233,000 contracts. You were playing the volume game with me, asking me how many options had traded this week in certain products. I'll guarantee that if I asked you what you thought the average daily volume on options on the 5-year note was, you wouldn't say over 200,000.
I probably would not know.
Yeah, but that's the fourth most active interest rate option market.
It doesn't get any love, really.
I know,
it's 10-year, 30, all that kind of stuff, but
it's actually
5-year, it gets no love.
It's actually ahead of the 30-year now. They flip spots. But back in November, Eurodollar options on the Eurodollar futures. Now, keep in mind that there are questions about the long-term viability of the Eurodollar contract because of what's going to happen in LIBOR over the next year and a half. But average daily volume for options on Eurodollar futures is up 45% year to date. On average, you trade 740,000 of those contracts a day. Or that was in November. Year to date, it's 1.14 billion a day. But the fact that we continued to see growth in the Eurodollar options in November when all other markets were down double digits and we had a huge financial option volatility crush. I mean, average volatility across any financially related market was down significantly in November. We'd gotten our Fed moves behind us. A lot of people had locked in a pretty good 2019 in the markets, and everybody seems to be looking forward to 2020. So you don't see a whole lot of people doing things in the options. Volume dropped off a cliff in a whole lot of markets, but hung in there in the Eurodollar market. So the fact that the volume continues to grow in a contract that people are a little bit concerned about, that's probably the number one surprise for me.
All right. That music means we've come to the end of not just this episode, but the year, the decade in TWIFO. Hard to believe. The year has flown by with so many. What were some of your surprises? You guys are always asking us. We have some, but what are your surprises? What really surprised you? Was it a particular product that you didn't think you were going to trade that you ended up trading? Was it some products, new products being listed, products being taken away, the movement, the volatility, the skew? What was it that caught your eye? Let us know. I'm curious what you guys are up to out there. But of course, that music means we come to the end of this epic journey through the world of futures options. Won't be back next week, listeners, of course. That's right in the tail end there of the Christmas season here. And of course, we'll have to look about the New Year's Day after as well. We'll see. But we'll be back soon to get you your fix. Certainly by the time the Bitcoin options are listed, we'll be back. But before we go, let me go back around the horn. Mr. Sean, that gives you some nice time to catch up, to find yourself between Europe and Asia here. And while you're doing that, sir, if folks are intrigued, they want to learn more about what you guys are up to over there in FTSE Russell land, where should they go? What should they do, sir?
Smith at FTSERussell.com. Please just reach out to me. I'm happy to help any and all investors, traders. Happy to do that. And I want to wish you both, Russell and Mark, a very, and Gene, your great help there. A very, very happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and the most successful of 2020 for all of us.
Well, thank you for that, sir. Happy holidays to you as well. And of course, listeners, you want to check out all the things cooking over there in FTSE Russell land. FTSE Russell is the place to go. Of course, give them a follow on the old Twitters as well, at FTSE Russell, for all that data you're always asking us about. Premium harvesting, buy right indices, active versus passive, all that stuff. They got it over there, and a lot more. And Mr. Rhodes, sir, any interesting nuggets, any hints, any teases of fun things you may be working on that may interest our audience?
I'm going to give advice.
Oh, okay.
Going into January, we often see the stock market. We'll probably see the S&P 500, the Russell 2000, and the other indexes maybe start to creep higher as the year begins. Watch the associated volatility indexes. If they kind of hold in or move up in sync with them, that is exactly what we saw before the Volmageddon thing. And I would we're going to get some natural bullish seasonality going into January. Watch those volatility indexes and watch them closely.
Watch the volatility indexes. I like it, sir. And if folks want to follow your work, where should they go? What should they do?
TABBforum.com.
There you go, TABBforum.com. Look for Dr. VIX. Is that your handle? What's your handle on TABB Forum?
It's my name.
Oh, that's
pretty dull.
That's no fun. You got to go to Dr. VIX. That's more fun. But TABBforum.com is a place to go to have some fun. And of course, if you're looking for fun, check out all the episodes of this show. Check out the reports, all the other cool stuff you can do. CMEgroup.com/TWIFO is a place to go to begin that journey. If you're clicking around the CME homepage, of course, you can find all the reports from Blue and Eric and everyone else out there. All that great research you guys are always asking us about. It's all up there as well. CMEgroup.com/TWIFO, the place to begin that journey. And on behalf of Sean and Mr. Rhodes, a.k.a. the once and future Dr. VIX, and our friends over there at CME, and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, and subscribing, for joining us all year long. Not quite all decade long, at least for this show, but all year long at least. And we'll see you back here in 2020 for more of This Week in Futures Options.
This Week in Futures Options is brought to you by QuickStrike, options pricing and analysis software. QuickStrike offers powerful and flexible options analysis and pricing tools via an easy-to-use web-based interface. View prices on outright options or spreads with comprehensive page-level analysis controls. Build trades, manage risk, or explore historical volatility. QuickStrike has you covered with market data reports ranging from open interest to the term structure of volatility. QuickStrike is the perfect addition to your trading toolkit. Learn more about QuickStrike at bantix.com. That's BANTIX.com. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at QuickStrike1. That's QUIKSTRIKE1. This Week in Futures Options is also brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world manage risks and seize opportunities. CME Group offers the deepest and most liquid options on futures across all asset classes, including interest rates, equity indexes, foreign exchange, energy, agriculture, and metals. For more information and educational resources about futures options at CME Group, visit cmegroup.com/options. This Week in Futures Options is also brought to you by FTSE Russell, a leading global provider of benchmarks, analytics, and data solutions. Investors in the U.S. and around the world are using FTSE Russell indexes to benchmark their investment performance and create investment funds, ETFs, structured products, and index-based derivatives. Many Options Insider Radio Network listeners will be familiar with the Russell 2000 Index. Russell 2000 futures and options are currently trading on the Chicago Board Options Exchange and CME Group. For more information, please visit ftserussell.com, cboe.com, and cmegroup.com. This broadcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute trading advice or the solicitation of purchases or sale of any futures or options. The rulebook of the applicable exchange should be consulted as the authoritative source on all current contract specifications. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.